As a performer, your body is there.
Hi, I'm Mad Kate, and you're listening to Sweat. Sexuality, work, extraction, art, theatrics. Sweat is a series of conversations about performance and performativity of the sexual and sexualized body at work, where work is broadly defined as the labor of survival, the labor of care, creativity, and capital A, art. How exactly do we define our work? And how does that work entangle and circumscribe our sexual identities, our creative lives, and the ways in which we provide care? How do we perform tasks, acts of care, and identities? Anchored in our always already racialized and sexualized bodies, our complex intersectionalities, these conversations are a means of relating through work to each other. I hope they contribute to dialogues which normalize sex work, and all work as deserving of respect, healthy conditions, and a living wage.
I think queer people are told that they're not allowed to think about their own deaths because simply every day is such a precarious existence for so many queer folks that it's like enough just to get through the day.
This month's conversation is with transdisciplinary artist Liz Rosenfeld. Liz is a New York City-born, Berlin-based transdisciplinary artist who works with film and video, performance, drawings, and has an experimental writing practice.
What is our responsibility as artists? What is our responsibility as performers? What is the responsibility that we have in the spaces that we're offered to take up with our work? And what do we want to do with that?
Liz addresses the sustainability of emotional and political ecologies, cruising methodologies, and past and future histories regarding the ways in which memory is queered. Their work deals with flesh as a non-binary collaborative material, specifically focusing on the potentiality of physical abundance and excess, approaching questions regarding the responsibility and privilege of taking up space, and how queer ontologies are grounded, invariant, hypocritical desires. They are currently on tour with their new book, Crossings, Creative Ecologies of Cruising, out on Rutgers University Press, and co-written with Dr. Joao Florencio.
Maybe I launch back into what you were saying, that it's an uncanny time in the sense that things are shocking and yet familiar too.
Everything that we've known is sort of boiling under the surface or has flared up at different times but then flared back down is exploding, so to speak. Like the surface tension has just erupted. And I think that, we are in particular programmed by living under late capitalism, regardless of how anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-xenophobic, anti-transphobic, all of it that we are in the ways in which we lead our lives. We're still programmed by a society that is out of our control to a certain extent. And I think that we've reached this point in which we all knew was always kind of there, but we never thought would really get pushed to this moment. Like we're not watching the movie, we're in the movie, or to quote Jane Fonda, this is not a rehearsal, folks, which to me is like a brilliant encapsulation of this moment. So I guess this uncanniness is the knowledge that all of this horrific, I don't even know events, politics that are landing and enacting so transparently. I mean, transparency is really one of the weapons of the moment. And so I guess that's what I meant by uncanny, is we can't believe it, but we absolutely knew it, that it's always kind of been there. And in the communities that I am associated with, it's part of the work to fight against and resist totalitarianism, fascism, but also to ask the question of how do we choose to live our lives radically, not just in a globalized way, but really in a micro localized way that then hopefully creates waves and creates structures that are outside of the economies that we're forced to live in.
I think that Trump has really weaponized an idea of transparency. It's what makes him so likable to many.
Yeah.
Because he's kind of so-called saying it like it is. And, having worked in refugee rights, for example, in 2001, starting my work there was just already so many things in place that were not protecting migrants in the United States and asylees in the United States, that a lot of people were not willing to take a hard look at. I mean, people who otherwise say that they were concerned, Democrats who didn't want to really have open borders, didn't want to take a radical policy on migration, weren't really willing to change it, but were perfectly okay with basically hiring casual labor and not really providing the kind of security that was really necessary, has been necessary for so long. And Trump has now used that to say, well, you know, you all say you want to have a hard border, let's do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, like another example of the transparency is that he pretty much has done everything he said he was going to do, but no one believed it would be possible. You know, Project 2025, like no one hid that from anybody.
Right.
It was all there. And that's what I find so terrifying is what is the will of the people, you know? And if the will of the people is really Trump, AFD, you know, far right, if that is really what the democracy is calling for, that's my question. How do we go into a radical acceptance of that and then also like continue on with our lives as hard as it will be for so many people that are affected by laws, injustice? This is kind of baffling and fascinating and sad to me, but he was actually elected, you know, and it's not just because a majority wanted him, but a specific majority for a certain reason. And those reasons are what need to be addressed, not whether it was actually real or not, because it's real and it's happening and we're in it.
Absolutely. There's people that agree with his policies and are happy that he's in power. I guess I think about it the way that we have to have this kind of radical acceptance on a more global level. You know, we are living in this world with very, very different communities that want very, very different things. And when we talk about coexistence, and especially when we're dreaming a world without major militarized violence or like a World War III, we do have to think about radical acceptance of difference, which ultimately, I hope, is not born through only the security state.
Absolutely. I know, and I see the amazing work that activists are doing, and I'm thinking so much about how do we build sustainable solidarity in our communities and across the politics of the left, which is so different in so many ways. And this is why I feel, again, just so invested in the micro and in the micro relationality and how to not just critique, but like offer a space to shift the things that I am really disappointed by or sort of disillusioned by within the context of the left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm interested in pulling that out a little bit more. What are some of those places that you'd like to be allowed to shift?
Well, I can speak, you know, from only the life that I'm leading, but how arts and culture are just being eradicated, particularly around where I am living and working, but also everywhere with like far right governments that they come for the artists and the sciences and culture first because they are considered to be, in their minds, superfluous, kind of like money suckers. But ultimately, what we know is that the arts and culture and sciences are where ideas and learning and camaraderie and solidarity happen. And particularly in Germany, there is just so much division about the like eradication of arts and culture. People often do not want to talk about the fact that it's related to Israel-Palestine. People who will not openly, first of all, even have an opinion, who refuse to have an opinion, but who also are afraid to name that we are witnessing a genocide and that we have been and that it's ongoing. And this to me is just so shocking. When I first kind of had that realization, like I showed up to a protest once at an arts and culture protest last year about the potential funding cuts, which did happen and are going to get worse.
Right.
You know, with a Palestine support pin on my lapel. And somebody said to me, "You're at the wrong protest." And I said to them, no, I'm not. This is not the wrong protest. This is about the budget cuts. And they were like, well, those politics don't really have anything to do with these politics. And I just like lost my mind, of course. And I was just kind of like, okay, I'm certainly not somebody who wants to generalize or umbrella identity, politics, diasporas, or lived experiences, because that's actually what neoliberal art does. And that's the danger, that it is the violence that it has created and placed upon us. And I just, at this point, I'm like, what are people afraid of? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And someone said to me, and I remember being so shocked, and I had gotten into such an argument with a couple folks about it. And I said, I don't know one artist who's been able to support themselves other than maybe like a very small handful of blue chip gallery artists or superstars, pop stars in the art world or something. I don't know one artist who has completely ever just lived off of grants. I mean, when I moved to Europe like 18 years ago full time, I was like shocked that artists had such a different approach to art making. Artists were considered amongst themselves at least real workers and laborers and workers of the state and seers of the state. And they were expected to be supported by public funding. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the US, as you know too, that's just something that you don't grow up with, that dialogue ever, or that discourse ever.
Right.
So to this group of people who were like, you're at the wrong protest, I said to them, what artist has ever supported themselves only from grants? Like, I just don't get that. And all of them, predominantly white German folks, sorry to say, but that's true. All of them said, what do you mean? We all have. And they were all like, around my age, middle-aged. And I said, wow, you've like never had any other job except making your own work? And they're all like, well, to a certain extent, yeah, this is what we expect.
Wow.
And there's something like quite gorgeous in that naivete, I think. But of course, it's just like deeply privileged and shocked. I was so surprised. I was like, I've been a chef. I've been a sex worker. I've been so many different things. And I'm so glad that I was. Also, I have and continue to work for other artists consistently and with other people in other fields as an artist who's collaborating with a scientist or an academic, because how else are you going to like get out of your own discourse and conversation?
Yeah. No, I can't imagine it either. But it does kind of make me wonder around like the side that I also find myself sort of arguing, like, when I'm thinking about budget cuts, like, what do I expect from the state? Should I accept anything from the German state, grants included?
Yes. I think that is a really hard decision. I have, as like an anti-Zionist Jew, I've felt distanced being taken by institutions I've worked with, and I also have distanced myself equally, because just I felt emotionally I couldn't do the political work that I needed to do. And I also was just kind of like you just said, do I have a choice to not make work for a German audience? Do I have that privilege to make that choice? Sometimes I don't. And then sometimes I do.
So let's talk about performance, and specifically your body, the explicit body in performance, and what it can do, what it feels like. I'm really interested in, from a performer's perspective, what it feels like and what it does. I think we just all, as performers, have very different feelings around what our performances are doing, and specifically why we're using our own bodies. Mm-hmm. And then the question might be also more, although I don't think necessarily fairly, but people would often beg the question, but why do you take off your clothes on stage? Or like, what makes it different there?
Yeah.
But that may or may not be what matters.
I mean, first of all, I should say I'm a performance maker and performer, and also a filmmaker and a writer. And I also make 2D kind of prints and drawings. And I consider all of it to be of my body, of this body, which is really the root of my work. So in that sense, I think what I've come to articulate about working from the self or working from this body is that it is my main material that's informing the narratives and the work or the journeys that I'm going on artistically, particularly because I'm always dealing with physicality and desire and intimacy as some of the core themes in what I'm making. So I am personally always attracted to artists who are, first of all, able to be self-reflexive in their work, able to also like show, the cracks and the leakiness. And in some cases, when things don't work out, I like to see real bodies trying to figure out where they're at and what they're going for. And, so many people would say like, oh, that's such like a solipsistic position, but actually I think at its best it's incredibly transparent and for me, understanding, I always say I'm collaborating with the body that I have as its own material, and that it's in its own time and space and expansion that I'm like housing and supporting and working with on a daily level. And I think that from that position and that kind of way of approaching this material, I find that people really become connected to their own bodies and sort of ask themselves, like, how am I interacting with the material that I'm dealing with, particularly from, like a position of being in a large body. I mean, of course, like I absolutely just want to say, I don't think of this as identity politics. I really think of it as like materiality. Being in a large body, being in a queer body, being in a trans body, it's all information. It's all like informative elements of what this body is, how this body is living. And then with that, how time and space are expanded and created for others to also collaborate and enter in and feel. It's a lot about feeling as well and holding space. The first thing I always, when I'm facilitating a seminar or a workshop, I always say, what is our responsibility as artists? What is our responsibility as performers? What is the responsibility that we have in the spaces that we're offered to take up with our work? And what do we want to do with that? I really strive to create work that isn't alienating, in that I'm just try to be as transparent and honest about that so that people can like see the ruptures and see the fissures, because I think that's where a lot of the emotionality comes out as well.
Mm-hmm. What does that mean when you're on stage? What does that honesty mean? What does that ask of you?
I think that it's, for me, really specifically in my performance practice, it's very much about adaptation, and it's about what the body's calling for in the moment. In the last 5 years, having had the privilege of doing a lot of access training and working with a creative access dramaturg in some of my work has gotten really accessible in ways that I hadn't necessarily considered before. And that's been extremely exciting and really important in the expansion of what I'm doing. And when I mean access, I don't mean necessarily have a sign interpreter come in when the piece is done, but I really mean incorporating elements of accessibility into how you're creatively making something.
During the process before it's shown on stage?
Yeah, it's part of the process. So one of the pieces where I started to really consider accessibility was incredibly text heavy. And we were going to have the text in both English and German because it premiered in Germany. So we had subtitles on both walls. And for example, what I learned to consider is how text can move to animate your voice. What are creative ways to make text meet the audience rather than just have it on a wall? Because I'm really into creating immersive performative spaces. So of course, architecturally from day one, we're thinking about seating, moving, lines of visibility, but then how do those lines of visibility affect the choreography of the work? Which is so exciting because every element affects the next element. All the work that I'm making is more and more considering adaptability to the bodies that are meeting it. And the people that I invite in are across the board, have different creative trainings and expertise. But what's important for me is that they are very interested in not performing something exactly as I want them to do, but performing something that they feel through their bodies. So it's like a proposal that they can really experience through whatever physicality they have access to. And of course, there are like specificities and directions. And, the one rule is like you can't stop moving in a certain way, but that doesn't mean your whole body for 3 hours. Like it could be your fingertip, it could be your head, like there are different directives that I want in the work. But if somebody's like, I can't do this and this, then we talk about like what that could be or what that opens up.
Yeah.
And it's something I really continue to hone in the process of how I make things and learn from and like sharpen, because having been in so many people's work, which I've learned so much about, and it's something that I truly love to do when the person has the capacity to also support how I can learn to do what they want me to do, which isn't very often.
Yeah, it's difficult.
It's difficult, which I understand. We're also, again, like there is this like training of exceptionalism that, that exceptionalism and virtuosity has a very specific definition that is largely not expanded, which I find so fucked up because we are virtuosic all in our ways. And it's about how you bring that out in the people you decide to work with.
Yeah.
And also how you support it and foster it and not extract it and use it and like take advantage of it.
For sure. I think also there's a lot of time pressure, either real or felt. And in that time, there's a kind of panic that can take over. I think that puts a really like hard brake on the possibility to see other possibilities. I don't want to go on a huge tangent about it, but it just makes me think a lot about how, works can only get funded when it's a new thing and it's premiering and this new, and more of artworks that make me also feel like there's just a factory wheel sometimes. And I'm really wondering why. I mean, as much as I would like to see everybody get a chance to show their work, on the other hand, sometimes it feels like an oversaturation, which I just don't get. I don't understand.
I mean, I think it comes down to economy, to be honest, and what this, particularly the economy of Berlin, has required of freelance artists for the last decade, which is to make, apply. The more you apply, the better it is for all of the funding bodies, whether you get the money or not, which is such a fucked up labor politic. Like there is very little consideration of actual supportive labor in our field in that way. I do think it's actually important to talk about because I do think it comes back to this question of the body. And ultimately, regardless of how good or how bad the work is, it's really about trends, what artists are making, what programmers or curators look good or look ahead of the moment. It's like anything else, it's a brand. So it's not just kind of young and hip. It's often like very dangerous and vapid in what it's representing in terms of this moment. And this is what I find terrifying, is not that like young, hip, fashionable people are getting more visibility, because I think that's just kind of the culture that we live in. And particularly being like the body that I am and the person that I am, I know that I get often curated in like very specific ways, like, real bodies in performance and dance or queer festivals. And it's not that I don't support those ideologies or politics, but that's not what I make work about. It's who I am. Mm-hmm. And of course, when you are those things, automatically, yes, my work is queer because I'm a queer person. My work shows a fat body because I am a fat body. So to be pigeonholed in those ways, it's like, I can't tell you how many times programmers or curators have come up to me after a show and said, wow, like I feel so much from watching you. I just have no idea how to program your work. It's too hard to program. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that means. You know what I mean? And that comment is also like not a compliment.
It's a lack of creativity.
I'm just like, where's the integrity in all of this? I really am at a loss.
Me too. I mean, I think a lot of the doubts that I came into art with, which was a choice that I made after leaving nonprofit world, kind of like skeptically, are just kind of coming back in full force. Yeah. And I'm often finding myself asking the question, what is art doing? What can it do right now?
I think it could do a hell of a lot. I actually have a lot of hope in art, more than I have. There's the art world or worlds, and then there's art, right?
Okay. Fair.
Like, one of the things that I think I am the most useful in is in education. And I love teaching and I love facilitating. The first thing that I say to a group of young artists is, I want you all to know that as your teacher, professor, whatever, facilitator, I'm not here to ensure that you have a career in art. I'm here to ensure that you're an artist for the rest of your life and to support you to be able to see that.
Cool.
And to support you to gain tools to do that, because the world always needs artists. We need artists to be doing things that are not just explicitly creating work.
I know I have this one question about like, what's the question driving you now? What's burning in you? And I'm not sure if we kind of got to that or if there was something that you wanted to raise.
I'm doing a big research turn in my work. Not turn, I mean, for me, it all like leads into the next, but I am very interested, and it will be spending quite a long time now researching and making work and writing about how queer artists have been forced into the position of erasing each other and cannibalizing each other in the art world because of the ways in which queer bodies have been forced into representation. So that's kind of like where my next turn is going right now.
Yeah, it's been interesting how representation, like strategic essentialism, it's been used strategically, and I can see why. And now we're getting to the other side of that, maybe if we can talk about sides, where, yeah, it's been pretty brutal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember, and I can't remember like what magazine this was, but maybe it was about 10 years ago. Part of me wants to say it was Time magazine, but I've been coming back to this example a lot in talks lately, that the word of the year was they, them. And I remember thinking like, fuck, this is the beginning of the end. This is it. I want to believe it's not, but I know that it is. So the question is, what do we do now with all of that gorgeous knowledge that we have like cultivated and learned and recognized within each other over the last like decade and a half of these politics like shifting so massively? But also, like, what is the danger of all of that? And how are we going to sharpen our tools to really, work to not let it, like, destroy us as queer people? Because it is. We already see it happening, particularly towards trans folks, towards HIV positive and people with AIDS. All I can say is to that, which I really make a point of speaking when I'm working with, like, younger folks in seminars and stuff, I just say to them, look, you're all born into this promise of queerness, and it's just not the case. And it never was going to be the case. But that's what you were born into, like 20-year-olds in their 20s. And I said, I always knew that it would never be the case because I lived in the 80s and 90s, and I saw what queers are capable of when they're so intensely weaponized. And we're seeing that again. So I really think it's time for us to like wake up and look at the tools that we know we've been taught and how we can sharpen those for this moment. And I think that's something we really need to think about.
Yeah, and maybe what you pointed to before, which just has to do with looking at how we are affecting and connected to people as we are going about with our new knowledges and our tools. Less at what they can do, but what they're doing.
And also to recognize that like there is just no way for large groups of people to agree on every way of being, but we can agree on a way of respecting and coexisting and working together. Like how is mutual aid possible between people who like have micro disagreements? Like we have to let that shit go if we're going to survive this.
Yeah. I mean, this is a question that keeps coming up for me. I often wonder, how can I walk into a room or be part of a revolution even where I feel like fucking cold energy? I know that's just sounds like, oh my God, poor me. But it's like, sometimes I'm just like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in this room. Even though we might have this common goal. Yeah.
That's the challenge. And I think we all are challenged with that. I certainly am, I certainly am. And there are parts of me that are like, I wish I had more capacity to overlook certain elements of certain fights in order to just be present. But that's something that I really want to work on, and I do think that I can do that in certain spaces and I can't do that in other spaces. And that's fine. We can't do everything. We can't all show up to the protest physically. We can't all feel comfortable enough to speak out in certain ways. But the important thing is that we're engaged and connected to each other through that, and that we can offer mutual aid towards each other and trust that mutual aid is coming from just that, a desire to provide mutual aid, that there is no other motives other than to keep each other going. And I think we still have a lot of work to do in all kind of community spaces, group spaces of just work, colleagues, all of it. We have a lot of work to do to trust each other.
Yeah.
And also, maybe you just don't trust certain people, so you find ways around that and you work with others, it's just never going to be a way to meet in a mutual way. It's not possible, but there is a way, I think, to provide mutual aid for those that you don't completely agree with wholeheartedly. But it is about this question of, what are you willing to give up? What are you able to give up? What kind of privileges would you be losing, and how, and are you able to give up those privileges? Because not everybody is,
Yes. Yeah. I sometimes like to try to look at it like not necessarily giving up or sacrificing, but looking at some of those things as opportunities for doing something a bit differently and what I might gain from that.
One of the things I'm the most outraged by consistently, and it's just because there's never been another way to sort of rise in a certain kind of career without acting like a total egocentric person. And that's often the case in the arts, Behavior does shock me still. The decisions that people make, I really, truly want to understand why, particularly in the ways that, people who still do have success, directors, choreographers, who are consistently working and depend on their work to be held by groups of bodies that are performing it, that are often the bodies making it, actually. How come with all of I understand that there's a whole set of expectations placed on those people once they hit a certain level of success in their careers. But to me, hitting a certain level of success, particularly when you're a white man, the fact that you can't see the kind of access and privilege that you're being given in your field, I'm really shocked consistently by that, because there are ways to ensure that the people who are working for you are, just by even asking them how they're feeling in the work. Is there something that could slightly shift to make things a bit more easier? And this is something that we have to consistently learn. It can't all just happen overnight, but this is, at the end of every project where I'm working with groups of people, I sit down with myself and say, what am I going to do differently next time? Because nothing goes smoothly. Nothing is perfect. Everyone is exhausted. And often that exhaustion is it's edging both I'm really burnt out, but I also feel good, which is a very confusing state for people to be in. But then how do you support that? And so these are all things I'm consistently asking myself is I will pay people as fair a wage as I can before I pay myself. You know what I mean? And that means maybe I have to take on some other kind of work that has nothing to do with my own work in order to make the work I want to make in the way I want to make it. It also means that it's not going to be necessarily as lucrative, or, I spend way less time than a lot of folks do publicizing myself. And that's not a moralistic cause. That's just about what I choose to put my energy into.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not about morals or what I think is right or wrong. It's just how I want to be in the world, and one hopes that that's enough, but it isn't often. So by the way, I'm certainly not complaining here. Like, I feel incredibly lucky and privileged and excited. And, I'm out here still going in multiple ways, and I'm really grateful for that. But because I'm grateful for that, I want to keep trying to be the person that others want to work with and not feel like they have to work for because they have no other choice in their field. And that's often the case,
We've been indoctrinated with the idea that actually working for somebody else comes with all of these pitfalls that like one is just meant to accept, that you can barely even talk to them directly. We unlearn those things to even say, like, why don't they ask me about my day? Like, a lot of us wouldn't even consider that as being something to aspire to,
Or just even like what you need to feel good in this working environment.
Totally.
And I will provide what I can with the resources that I have, which isn't going to be like a perfect situation because that's not how arts works. But I don't know. It's just, for me, it's just really about practicing good labor as much as you possibly can and being in a space of agreement about how things are rolling out. And I don't know, I understand that's just not the reality. And that's why certain people are often more successful than others, because they are unapologetic about all of those sides of how they make work and how they, get out into the world, how they sell themselves, how they brand themselves, all of this stuff. Like, I totally understand you. In a way, you do what you have to do. But on the other side of things, I'm like, once you get that access, what do you do with it? You just think you think you don't have enough access once you get that access. That's the problem. You just think more, more, more. I have to run a this, a that, and the other thing. But like, there was a time when you didn't have a this, a that, and the other thing. And all you had was like, one room in your house to make the thing. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have all those things, but then what do you do with them when you do,
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, I'm not pointing fingers here because we're all part of it. I'm not like, fuck institutions, fuck programmers, fuck curators. Like, I'm often asking the question, how do we create mutual aid between all these different roles? How does the artist take care of the curator in the same way that the curator can take care of the artist? Like, what is that relationship of care? And often, well, I would say most of the time I've ever asked that question, I get shot down like crazy, as if I'm implying that institutions and people who work within them are evil, which I don't hear at all in that question. I'm actually asking, how do we support each other during a time of scarcity and crisis?
This dance piece that I actually didn't get to see that you did at Sophia and Zayla was about care and also about aging and end of life care. Yeah. And I would really love to hear about that process as a performance and how that translates, or how one engages with that into kind of real world dreams of care.
I love thinking and reflecting on this project because it's a work that got shown a few times and in classic Berlin form just kind of didn't go anywhere afterwards. It was a work that had the privilege of having a lot of development time, partly because we started it before the pandemic. It was the first time I had that much R&D time for any piece. And it was, it started before the pandemic, these questions of what is queer death in terms of this idea of how we want to die, and can we be as self-determined as possible through queer strategies and queer relationships, and how we want to die versus how much of it is out of our hands. What does that even mean, right? And it was very much reflecting through me and Rodrigo's experiences of losing our parents at very young ages and being those caretakers for our parents. And then also really looking at what queer family is and how we've built our own. Like, I think queer people are told that they're not allowed to think about their own deaths because simply every day is such a precarious existence for so many queer folks that it's like enough just to get through the day. So we were thinking a lot about that as well. But also on the other side of things, the kind of problematics of a utopian vision of dying? What does it mean to allow yourself to want to imagine your own death? So we were really deconstructing a lot of concepts about queer utopia that we found beautiful, but also didn't necessarily age well or became really problematic in a lot of ways. So then once we started making the piece, it was early days of returning to public life, almost 2 years from the point at which we had started developing it. And of course, we were in this world health crisis, both having, I think at that point, we both had COVID probably, and also very much been affected by folks that had been extremely, extremely sick who were close to us. And in some cases, almost died. So we were kind of like, wow, this whole thing has really changed. It was particularly important to us that everyone in the studio were queer folks who were artists and also doing other kind of practices in their lives that were crucial to their work. We worked with my friend Christian, who's a hospice doctor and also a painter. He came into the studio and spoke with us about his experience during COVID, about why he wanted to be a hospice doctor and how controversial that choice was in his field, because as a doctor, to choose that means that you're not choosing to save people, you're choosing to assist them into death. Yeah. And that there's no futurity or even ambition as a doctor and choosing to work as a hospice doctor, which I found really interesting. He was like, no one understands why a young person in my position wants to do this as a doctor.
Wow.
And he said, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I'm a queer person, actually, that I want to do this. And that I do feel that when I'm with people and talking with people, there's another way that I have walked through this world where I can connect with them. That, they don't need to know that I'm queer, but it's like a queer sensibility that helps me and that informs me in this work. So we talked a lot about that. We worked with Dasnia Summer, who's an amazing dancer and a bondage expert. And we embraced bondage in terms of chronic pain, which is something that we both experience in different ways. Particularly Rodrigo has lived with his whole life, and he had never experienced bondage before, and it was incredibly important for him. And it was also a beautiful way to share erotic desire between friends and kin, rather than an erotic desire that is about a sexual act or, achieving something through a sexual act. Yeah. Which is very queer to me, different ways of having relationships. So bondage became very key in the work of connectivity, a connecting material. And then ultimately, what also was very beautiful about this piece was, in the end, we were just like, I love you, but I can't stand you. And that's such a honest and real experience to have with anyone that you become that close with in any process, whether it's caretaking for somebody who's very, very ill or dying or making a piece, And so the show ends in us wrestling, but for real, really beating each other up, which is so cliche, but it was just something we had to do because we couldn't find an ending that felt right. And there is something else I love about that show, which I think Rodrigo would agree with, is that there's a little element of deep, uncool cheesiness to it.
Yay.
Which I love. Yeah, because it was us just working it out.
I mean, absolutely. I think it goes back to how we started, which is around you have to create radical other communities because we, in the system in which we're interacting, the kind of futures aren't possible. Were you able to do some dreaming of end of life care, of ways that we could find end of life futures for ourselves that would feel like real care, feel like hope?
I think ultimately the sort of utopic moment that we came to is that we can't actually envision that. All of the desires that we both had were adjacent for sure. And they were, even in some cases, compatible. But the vision, it's we couldn't create one vision to work towards, which I think is very realistic, which is why I feel that this notion of a commune, it's totally possible if a group of people are committed to starting something and creating something. But I think to commit to something like that for the rest of your life, like anything, like a relationship, this idea of soulmates, or I don't think it's possible because people change. People grow, they change, they want different things. But what I do think is possible to commit to is a life of considering the people that you're touching and how they're affected. And that's, to me, a realistic notion of working towards creating spaces of recognition and consideration. And I don't mean like representational consent politics or, false notions of safety through diversity politics. I'm talking about real interactions that are messy and hard and require, like you keep saying, time to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have to admit, I have a very hard time creating space for folks that are really not up for discussion or not up for looking at themselves or hearing how they might have fucked up or hurt somebody or made a bad decision, because we all fuck up and hurt people and make bad decisions. It's how we learn. But I think that particularly the economy of arts and culture doesn't have any space for that.
Right. Absolutely. Liz, I had wanted to ask you about cruising a little bit more. You have a new book out that you've been also touring.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Another collaboration with an academic named Joao Florencio, who is a very dear friend of mine. And we co-wrote a book about cruising and how it touches us in our work. And it basically became this steamy, auto-theoretical exploration of queer love and friendship through our love of cruising and exploration of cruising. And when you read the book, you don't quite know who's talking about who or who's talking at what moment. So you go between our two voices that really merge into one or many at the same time. And then sometimes you realize it's Joao talking or me talking, but it's a kind of exploration of like our cruising experiences and our desire towards each other as artist and academic, and how we feel like inspired and moved by each other, but also it's very much about the world we want to live in terms of queer desire. And so a lot of feedback I've gotten from folks who have read it are like, it doesn't feel like it's you and Joao. It feels at moments that the voices can be anybody who's got this desire for cruising.
How do you contend with the idea that you are separate bodies as you cruise, and what it means to be in your body as you cruise?
A lot of people have asked that question in different iterations, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically because cruising is generally considered to be a cis gay male practice, which, as we've known it predominantly in our lives, it has been spoken about and regarded and acknowledged as that. And so I think what Joao and I really try to do is like transcend exclusivity. We don't ignore that it happens. I mean, certainly we talk about it. I've made a lot of artwork about cruising for like 20 plus years. So we talk about some of the videos I've made, which one involves a narrative of me getting kicked out of a dark room for being found out by one of the men, or the problematics of the concept of passing is a big theme. But we do I think we approach this question of the differentiation and access between us to cruising spaces through exploring our desire for cruising rather than like just kind of naming the obvious, and the experiences that we have, in particular, one experience of going cruising together, because I really insisted that we should before we finished the book, where it's the first time I've been in a dark room since I had been transitioning, where I'm not getting read as anything other than male. And I'm, for the first time in my life, like uninterested in being acknowledged in that space because I'm just there to watch Joao. So, so we explore that differentiation through experience, I think, and how we connect through our physical bodies.
Beautiful.
July 12th is the Berlin book event, Berlin launch.
Great. I mean, I feel so much hunger and longing in cruising, but I've had over and over the experience of being read through my genitals, like read through my body right away. That, I mean, it's also always an experience of being othered in those spaces. Not to say that I haven't had really fun times there as well, but it's been more, I feel like, self-curated rather than the experience of an anonymity of walking in there.
Yeah, and also we talk about that too, kind of like the problematics of self-curated cruising spaces and how they just kind of have never worked. And also how they exclude, there's like a huge exclusionary politic that comes with that, which ideally we're trying to transcend. And I don't necessarily have a problem with separatist spaces. Like, I think they're really important for many, for many groups of folks. But I will say, I think that also cruising for us is not just about the kind of like sexual relationships or experiences that we find, but also just like, for me in particular, as like a experience and process and methodology in understanding and reading desire and bodies. And that just inspires me creatively and artistically as well. To understand how bodies meet is a lot of also why I'm so invested in cruising and why I use it as like a directive or an insight into the work that I make. But it's also been a big discussion for me, or a big topic for me since I was like 20, about, I think it's how I really also found my gender, or continue to find my gender, how my gender changes, and has a lot to do with it as well. So there's a lot in it that's not just a sex act, I would say.
Yeah, beautiful. I can definitely identify. Say my cruising experiences have been a process of self-discovery and hopefully continue to be.
And just to say one more thing about that, somebody asked a question the other night at one of our book events, like, what is cruising for you? And for me, I said, it's really about the experience of feeling seen, whether that's feeling invisible, feeling anonymous, being a voyeur, but it's this feeling that you are feeling recognized in whatever it is that you need to be doing without having to like necessarily advocate or explain yourself. Like, I think cruising also is, walking down the street and queer strangers just acknowledging each other like, I see you. Like, that is cruising for me. It's just acknowledging that we're here and we exist and we're sharing space, and yeah.
Beautiful.
You've just heard from transdisciplinary artist Liz Rosenfeld. Liz is currently on tour with their new book, Crossings, Creative Ecologies of Cruising, out on Rutgers University Press and co-written with Dr. Joao Florencio. You can read more about Liz and their work in the show notes. I'm Mad Kate, and you've been listening to Sweat, Sexuality, Work, Extraction, Art, Theatrics. Sweat is a series of conversations about performance and performativity of the sexual and sexualized body in work. The theme music was composed by me and features the voice of performer and actress Lori Baldwin. Sweat airs every second Tuesday of the month at 13 hours Central European Time on Collaboradio. Free Radio's Berlin-Brandenburg, broadcasting on 88.4 FM in Berlin, 90.7 FM in Potsdam, and streaming online at fr-bb.org. Afterwards, it's available for streaming wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much, and until next time.